The clock on the dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m. as the Marine pulled his truck into the dimly lit rest stop. He hadn't planned to stop here. His usual spot was another 30 miles down Interstate 95, but something about this place caught his attention tonight. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent lights flickered over the nearly empty parking lot, or maybe it was just his gut feeling, developed over 15 years of service, telling him to take a break. The rest stop was like any other along the eastern seaboard. A brick building with vending machines, restrooms, and a few picnic tables scattered around. At this hour, only 2 other vehicles occupied the vast parking lot. A sleeping trucker's semi and a black luxury SUV with heavily tinted windows that seemed out of place in this humble setting. As he parked his truck, the Marine's trained eye noticed something unusual about the SUV. The engine was running, evident from the exhaust fumes curling up in the cool night air. Strange for a vehicle just parked at a rest stop, especially at this hour. He was about to mind his own business and head to the restroom when movement caught his attention. Through the SUV's back window, barely visible in the harsh overhead lights, a young girl's face appeared. She couldn't have been more than 15, her eyes wide with an emotion he recognized from his combat days, pure, unfiltered fear. But it wasn't just the fear in her eyes that made him pause. It was her hands. They were moving in a specific pattern. 3 fingers up, then closed into a fist, then spread wide again. The gesture was familiar to him. He'd seen it during a recent training session about recognizing signs of human trafficking. It was a silent cry for help, a modern-day SOS designed to be supple enough to use under watchful eyes. The Marine felt his heart rate quicken, but his face remained neutral. Years of training had taught him the value of appearing casual while assessing a threat. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while actually studying the vehicle. 2 men sat in the front seats, one behind the wheel, the other slouched in the passenger seat, both trying too hard to look relaxed. The luxury SUV itself told the story. New model, dealer plates, windows tinted well beyond legal limits. Everything about it screamed money and secrecy. But it was the small details that set off alarm bells, the lack of personal items visible through the windows, the way it was parked facing the exit, ready for a quick getaway. The girl in the back made the hand signal again, more urgently this time. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and in that brief connection, he saw a strength that moved him. Despite whatever circumstances had brought her here, she was fighting back in the only way she could. Time seemed to slow down as the Marine weighed his options. Direct confrontation could put the girl in immediate danger. Walking away wasn't an option, not with what he'd seen. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he remembered the highway patrol number he'd memorized years ago. Just then, the SUV's engine revved slightly. The men in front were getting restless. The Marine knew he had seconds to act before they pulled away. With practiced casualness, he shifted position, making sure his phone captured the vehicle's license plate while appearing to take a selfie. The air felt electric with tension as he pressed the emergency number, keeping his eyes down and his body language relaxed. He could feel the weight of his combat training, the responsibility of the moment, and most importantly, the trust that young girl had placed in a complete stranger by daring to signal for help. As he waited for the call to connect, the Marine reflected on how ordinary this night had seemed just minutes ago. How many other vehicles had passed this SUV without noticing? How many people had missed the silent plea of a young girl brave enough to risk everything by asking for help? The dispatcher's voice came through his phone, and he kept his tone conversational, as if chatting with a friend, while relaying crucial details. Location, vehicle description, license plate number. The subtle signs of trafficking he'd observed. Every second felt crucial, every detail potentially vital for what would come next. Through it all, he maintained his casual pose, knowing that appearing too interested could spook the men in the SUV. His mind raced with contingency plans. What if they tried to leave before help arrived? What if they spotted him making the call? But his exterior remained calm, a skill honed through years of high-pressure situations. The Marine's heart pounded against his chest, but 15 years of military training kept his exterior calm as he watched the situation unfold. His mind raced through various scenarios, each possibility demanding a different response. The young girl's face appeared in the window again, her eyes meeting his for just a brief moment, a connection that carried the weight of trust he couldn't bear to break. He stood by his truck, one hand casually resting on the hood while the other held his phone. To anyone watching, he looked like just another tired traveler checking his messages at a late-night rest stop. But his attention never wavered from the SUV, noting every detail that could prove important later: the way the driver kept adjusting his side mirror, the passenger's constant checking of his phone, the subtle movements in the back seat. The highway patrol dispatcher's voice came through his earpiece quietly, professional and focused. "Sir, can you describe any identifying marks on the vehicle?" The Marine spoke softly, disguising his words with natural gestures as if he were on a casual call. He described the dealer plates, the specific shade of black paint, the custom chrome wheels that would make the vehicle easier to spot. Years of combat experience had taught him to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing. The SUV's windows were tinted well beyond legal limits, but he could make out shapes moving inside. The young girl appeared to be alone in the back seat, though the cargo area behind her was hidden from view. His trained eye caught other details: the fresh mud on the wheel wells suggesting recent off-road travel, the lack of personal items visible through the windows, the way the vehicle was parked for a quick exit. The dispatcher's voice remained steady in his ear. "Units are en route. Estimated arrival time 8 minutes. Please maintain visual contact if possible, but do not engage." The Marine acknowledged with a supple still maintaining his casual pose. 8 minutes. In combat, 8 minutes could feel like 8 seconds or 8 hours. Here, in this poorly lit rest stop with a young life hanging in the balance, every second felt crucial. He noticed a change in the SUV's idle. The engine's pitch shifted slightly higher. The driver was getting ready to move. The Marine felt his muscles tense, ready to react, but he forced himself to maintain his relaxed posture. A wrong move now could put the girl in even more danger. Keeping his movements natural, he walked toward the vending machines, positioning himself to better see the vehicle's exit route. The rest stop's layout offered only 2 ways out: the main entrance back to the highway and a secondary access road that led to a network of local streets. He relayed this information to dispatch, his words hidden in what seemed like a mundane phone conversation. The girl's hand signals had stopped now, but he could see her outline through the window, sitting unnaturally still. His combat instincts told him she was trying to avoid drawing attention to herself after taking the enormous risk of signaling for help. The courage it must have taken for her to make that gesture, knowing the dangers if she was caught, struck him deeply. Suddenly, the SUV's headlights flicked on, cutting through the darkness. The Marine's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady as he updated dispatch. "Looks like they're about to move," he said, disguising the urgency in his tone. "Any units close?" The dispatcher confirmed 2 patrol cars were less than 5 minutes out, but urged him not to intervene directly. The SUV's engine revved, and it began rolling forward. The Marine walked quickly but calmly to his truck, knowing he needed to be ready to follow while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. His military training had prepared him for high-stakes surveillance, but this was different. This wasn't a combat zone, it was American soil, and the person at risk wasn't a soldier, but a young girl who had trusted him with her silent plea for help. As he slipped into his truck's driver's seat, he could see the SUV heading toward the rest stop's exit. His hand hovered over the ignition, waiting until they committed to a direction. The highway would make them easier to track, but local roads would give them more places to hide. Either way, he knew he couldn't lose them, not with what was at stake. The dispatcher's voice came through again, updating him on the approaching patrol unit's positions. The Marine absorbed the information while watching the SUV's brake lights, trying to predict their next move. His years of experience reading terrain and anticipating enemy movements were now focused on the dark streets of suburban America, where the battlefield was marked not by explosions and gunfire, but by the silent struggle of human trafficking happening in plain sight. Time seemed to stretch as he waited, balancing the need to maintain visual contact with the risk of being spotted. The SUV paused at the rest stop exit, its turn signal blinking in the darkness. The next few moments would determine whether this young girl's brave signal for help would lead to her rescue, or if the vehicle would disappear into the night, taking her hopes of freedom with it. The SUV's taillights disappeared around a corner as it turned onto a narrow county road, moving away from the well-lit interstate. The Marine followed at a careful distance, his truck's headlights dimmed to avoid detection. Every turn of the wheel brought back memories of convoy operations overseas, but this time the stakes felt even higher. This wasn't about military objectives, it was about a young girl's life. His phone lay on the passenger seat, the dispatcher's voice providing a steady stream of updates through his wireless earpiece. 2 highway patrol units were converging on their location, but the rural roads complicated their approach. The SUV ahead was taking an erratic path, making sudden turns onto smaller roads, clearly trying to shake any potential followers. "They're heading east on County Road 23, the Marine reported quietly, keeping his voice steady despite the growing tension. "Looks like they're trying to lose anyone following them." He recognized the tactic. It was something he both used and encountered during his military service. The difference was that now he was trying to save a life, not take one. The dark countryside rolled past his windows as he maintained a careful pursuit. Fields and scattered houses appeared as shadowy shapes in the pre-dawn darkness. His headlights caught the reflection of road signs and mailboxes, each one helping him track their location for the approaching patrol units. Years of night driving in hostile territories had taught him how to follow without being seen, how to anticipate moves before they happened. The SUV suddenly accelerated, its engine roaring in the quiet night. The Marine's grip tightened on his steering wheel, but he resisted the urge to speed up immediately. "They're making their move," he reported to dispatch. Increased speed, approximately 70 miles per hour on a back road. His military training kicked in as he calculated distances, speeds, and safe following distances while anticipating their possible routes. A sharp turn ahead revealed more about their possible destination. This road led to an area of abandoned warehouses, a perfect place for them to try to lose any pursuit. The Marine had noticed these buildings during his regular drives, always marking potential points of interest out of habit. Now that knowledge could prove crucial. "Be advised," he told dispatch, "they're heading toward the old industrial park. Multiple exits, lots of places to hide." He could hear the urgency in the dispatcher's voice as she relayed this information to the approaching units. The patrol cars were getting closer, but they needed to coordinate their approach carefully to avoid spooking the SUV's occupants into doing something desperate. The road curved again, and the Marine dropped back even further, knowing the warehouses would offer limited lighting and multiple turn options. His mind raced through possible scenarios. If they turned left, they'd have access to the river road. Right would take them toward the railroad tracks. Either way, they were running out of options, and that made them dangerous. Suddenly, the SUV's brake lights flared bright red in the darkness. The Marine's combat reflexes took over as he smoothly decelerated without revealing his position. The vehicle ahead was slowing near an intersection, its turn signal blinking uncertainly. This was a crucial moment. Their next move would either lead them into the trap being set by law enforcement or give them a chance to slip away. Through his earpiece, he could hear the dispatcher coordinating with the patrol units. They were setting up a rolling roadblock, but they needed time to get into position. The Marine understood his role perfectly: keep eyes on the target without forcing them to make any desperate moves. The young girl's safety depended on maintaining this delicate balance. The cool night air carried the distant sound of sirens, still far enough away to not alert the SUV's occupants. The Marine watched as the vehicle ahead hesitated at the intersection, its brake lights reflecting off the wet pavement. In that moment of uncertainty, he could almost feel the tension inside that vehicle. The traffickers realizing they might be followed, the girl perhaps daring to hope that rescue was near. His training had taught him that the most dangerous moments often came just before dawn, when fatigue and desperation could lead to fatal mistakes. As he watched the SUV finally commit to a turn, he knew the next few minutes would determine whether this night ended in a rescue or a tragedy. The weight of that responsibility pressed against his chest, but his hands remained steady on the wheel. The emergency dispatch center hummed with focused energy as information began flooding in from multiple sources. The Marine listened intently through his earpiece as the dispatcher's voice took on a new urgency. "The license plate you provided matches a vehicle connected to 3 other missing persons cases along the East Coast," she reported, her words careful and measured. As patrol units moved into position around the area, the bigger picture started coming into focus. The dispatcher patched through a detective who had been working trafficking cases for the past 6 months. The SUV's description matched reports from rest stops in 4 different states. Each incident followed a similar pattern: young girls vanishing from their communities, only to be spotted briefly at highway rest areas, always late at night. The Marine absorbed this information while maintaining his discreet pursuit. The weight of what he'd stumbled upon pressed against his chest. This wasn't just about one brave girl who dared to signal for help. She was part of something much larger, something that had been hiding in plain sight along America's highways. Through his earpiece, he could hear law enforcement officials coordinating their response. The detective's voice was steady as she shared crucial details. "We've got similar vehicles reported in Virginia, Maryland, and South Carolina. Always moving at night, always using back roads when they think they're being watched. They've been smart, but tonight they made a mistake." The dispatcher pulled up more information as it came in from various agencies. Hotel receipts found during recent investigations showed a pattern of movement up and down the interstate corridor. Prepaid credit cards, burner phones, and multiple vehicles with dealer plates, all pieces of a puzzle that was finally coming together. The Marine thought about his own drives along these same highways, how many times he might have passed similar vehicles without knowing what was happening inside them. The realization made his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm as he updated dispatch about the SUV's current position. More details emerged as different law enforcement databases were cross-referenced. The detectives' team had been building a case for months, gathering evidence piece by piece. Gas station security footage, hotel registrations, and highway cameras had captured glimpses of the operation, but they'd never been able to catch them in the act. Until now. The pattern suggests they're part of a larger network, the detective explained through the radio channel. They use these rest stops as temporary holding points while moving between cities. The dealer plates make the vehicles harder to track. They switch them out regularly. The Marine recognized the tactics. They weren't so different from other kinds of smuggling operations he'd learned about during his service. The scope of the investigation expanded with each passing minute. Other agencies were being notified, their databases revealing more connections. The young girl's signal for help wasn't just leading to her own rescue, it was providing the break law enforcement had been waiting for. Through his windshield, the Marine could still see the SUV's taillights ahead. Unaware that they were now at the center of a rapidly expanding investigation, the vehicle's every move was being logged, every turn documented as evidence. Phone records were being pulled, surveillance footage from previous rest stops was being reviewed, and hotel staff along the interstate were being contacted for information. The detective's voice came through again, sharing more details about the missing persons cases that might be connected. Young girls had disappeared from communities all along the eastern seaboard, their stories echoing with similar details: last seen near shopping centers, school bus stops, or local parks, places where teenagers should have been safe. As law enforcement units moved into their final positions, the Marine processed what this all meant. This single night, this one brave girl's signal could help bring down an entire trafficking network. Her courage might not only save herself, but could help recover other victims and prevent future abductions. The dispatcher's voice remained professional, but carried a note of hope as she coordinated between different agencies. Officers were being mobilized at key points along known trafficking routes. Bus stations were being notified, hotel staff were being alerted, and highway patrol units in neighboring states were moving into position in case they were needed. What had started as a chance encounter at a rest stop had evolved into something much larger. The Marine thought about how close they'd come to missing it all if he hadn't stopped at that particular rest area, if he hadn't noticed the girl's signal, if he hadn't received that trafficking awareness training that helped him recognize the signs. As the net tightened around the SUV, files were being unsealed, warrants were being prepared, and investigators were assembling the bigger picture. Each piece of information revealed more about how these traffickers had operated for so long without detection. They'd used the vastness of America's highway system against itself, turning rest stops and truck stations into temporary prisons for their victims. The detectives' team was already preparing for what they might find, not just in the SUV, but in the locations connected to it. Every hotel receipt, every gas station visit, every toll booth photo could lead to another victim, Another family waiting for answers, another chance to bring someone's child home. The pre-dawn sky was just beginning to lighten as state troopers moved into their final positions. The Marine watched from a safe distance as the carefully planned intervention began to unfold. Years of military experience had taught him what was about to happen, but he'd never been on this side of an operation before, the civilian who had set it all in motion with a single phone call. Red and blue lights suddenly pierced the darkness, reflecting off road signs and tree branches. The highway patrol had chosen their location perfectly. A stretch of road with high embankments on both sides, leaving no room for the SUV to swerve off the pavement. The Marine watched as patrol cars smoothly executed their rolling roadblock, boxing in the target vehicle with practiced precision. Through his earpiece, he could hear the calm, professional voices of law enforcement coordinating their movements. Target vehicle contained. All units in position. The SUV's brake lights flared as the driver finally realized what was happening. But it was too late. They were surrounded by law enforcement vehicles, each positioned to prevent any chance of escape. The Marine's hands gripped his steering wheel as he watched the scene unfold. He'd followed the SUV for over an hour, maintaining just enough distance to avoid detection while keeping them in sight. Now he could only watch and wait as trained professionals took over. His part in this story was nearly done, but for the young girl in that SUV, everything was about to change. Officers emerged from their vehicles with practiced efficiency, their movements careful and coordinated. The night air carried the sound of firm commands being issued through patrol car speakers. Driver and passengers, keep your hands where we can see them. Exit the vehicle slowly. The Marine recognized the controlled tension in their voices, firm but calm, authoritative but not aggressive. The driver's door opened first, and a man emerged with his hands raised. The passenger followed moments later, both of them looking shocked at how quickly their world had collapsed around them. But the Marine's attention was fixed on the back door of the SUV, waiting for it to open, hoping the young girl was safe. When the rear door finally swung open, the girl stepped out slowly, her movements cautious but determined. Even from a distance, the Marine could see the strength in her posture, the same strength that had given her the courage to signal for help. A female officer immediately moved to her side, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and guiding her away from the SUV. Evidence technicians arrived on scene, their vehicles adding more flashing lights to the growing collection. The Marine listened as they reported their initial findings through the radio channel. Inside the SUV, they discovered a collection of burner phones, hotel key cards, and a laptop that would later prove crucial to the investigation. But more importantly, they found a backpack containing the girl's identification and personal belongings, proof of who she was and where she belonged. The female officer had moved the girl to the back of an ambulance, where paramedics began a careful medical evaluation. Through his earpiece, the Marine heard the officer's gentle voice as she spoke to dispatch. "She's okay. Dehydrated and tired, but okay." Those simple words carried the weight of everything this night had been about. More patrol cars arrived, bringing detectives who would begin the detailed work of processing the scene. The Marine watched as they photographed the SUV, collected evidence, and interviewed the officers who had participated in the stop. Everything had to be documented perfectly. This case was bigger than just one rescue now. The sky was growing lighter by the minute, dawn approaching with its promise of a new day. The Marine could see the girl sitting in the ambulance now, talking with a crisis counselor who had arrived on scene. Her shoulders were straighter, her head held higher, as if the weight of fear was finally lifting. She had taken an enormous risk by signaling for help, and that courage had paid off. Other agencies began arriving, FBI agents, state investigators, and victim advocacy representatives. Each had a role to play in what would become a much larger investigation. The Marine heard snippets of their conversations through his earpiece as they coordinated their next steps. Phone records would need to be traced, hotel surveillance footage collected, connections to other cases examined. The two men from the SUV sat in separate patrol cars, their shocked expressions visible through the windows. They had thought themselves invisible, moving through the night like shadows. But one girl's bravery and one chance encounter had brought their operation crashing down. The Marine thought about how many others might be saved because of what happened here tonight. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the scene, The Marine finally allowed himself to relax slightly. He could see the girl standing now, speaking with a detective while a victim advocate stood supportively by her side. She looked different in the growing light, stronger, more determined. She had been fighting for her freedom long before she made that hand signal, and now she was free. The dispatcher's voice came through his earpiece one last time. "We'll need your statement for the official report. But first, I want you to know you did good tonight, really good." The Marine thought about all the combat missions he'd been part of, all the operations he participated in. Somehow, this quiet intervention on a dark highway felt more important than any of them. Morning traffic was beginning to pick up on nearby roads as the scene continued to unfold. Soon, this stretch of highway would be bustling with commuters who would never know what had happened here in the pre-dawn hours. But for the young girl who had dared to signal for help, for the Marine who had noticed, and for all the professionals who had come together to make this rescue possible, this sunrise marked more than just another day. It marked a moment when good people had come together to do what was right. The investigation moved quickly in the days following the highway rescue. The young girl's bravery had cracked open a case that law enforcement had been struggling to solve for months. Inside a quiet conference room at the state police headquarters, investigators pieced together a wall of evidence that grew larger with each passing hour. The laptop found in the SUV proved to be a goldmine of information. Computer forensics experts worked around the clock, recovering deleted files and tracing digital breadcrumbs that led to more trafficking locations. Hotel receipts, gas station records, and toll booth photographs began telling a story of a network that stretched across multiple states. "Look at this," one investigator said, pointing to a map dotted with pins marking locations of suspected trafficking activity. Every pin represents a rest stop where similar vehicles were spotted. The pattern was clear now. They had been using America's highways as their own underground railroad, moving victims under the cover of darkness while the world slept. The young girl's information helped fill in crucial gaps. Working with trained counselors and victim advocates, she shared details about the places they had stopped, the people she had seen, and the conversations she had overheard. Each piece of information was carefully documented, building a stronger case while ensuring she felt safe and supported. As the investigation expanded, other law enforcement agencies joined the effort. FBI agents brought in additional resources, including specialized units trained in tracking financial crimes. The traffickers had left a trail of bank records, wire transfers, and credit card transactions that now led investigators to their associates. The breakthrough came 3 days after the rescue. A series of coordinated raids targeted locations in 3 different states. SWAT teams moved simultaneously, their timing precise to prevent any suspects from warning each other. In a rundown motel just off the interstate, they found 2 more missing girls. An hour later, another raid on a suburban house recovered 3 more victims. Phone records from the seized devices revealed a network of accomplices, people who had helped arrange transportation, provided fake documents, or looked the other way in exchange for money. Each arrest led to more information, more locations, more chances to rescue others who were still being held. The young girl's story became a powerful tool for raising awareness. Without revealing her identity, law enforcement used her experience to teach others about the importance of recognizing trafficking signs. Her hand signal, learned from a social media safety video, had saved not only her life but helped rescue many others. Inside the Human Trafficking Task Force headquarters, the investigation wall continued to grow. Photos of rescued victims were replaced with pictures of them reuniting with their families. Each success story strengthened the resolve of the investigators working the case. This wasn't just about making arrests anymore, it was about bringing people home. The Marine who had first spotted the girl's signal visited the task force headquarters a week after the rescue. The investigators showed him the impact his actions had made, the number of victims recovered, the trafficking routes uncovered, the network that was now being dismantled piece by piece. His decision to stop at that rest area had set in motion events that would help change many lives. Community organizations began reaching out to support the rescued victims. Safe houses offered shelter and protection, counselors provided trauma-informed care, and advocacy groups helped them begin the process of rebuilding their lives. The strength these young survivors showed inspired everyone involved in their recovery. The investigation revealed how the traffickers had operated undetected for so long. They had used technology to stay hidden, changing phones regularly and using encrypted messaging apps. But they hadn't counted on the courage of one young girl who refused to give up hope, or the alertness of a Marine who knew what to look for. As more arrests were made, investigators uncovered connections to other missing persons cases. Some dated back months, even years. Families who had been searching for their children finally got the answers they had been praying for. Task force members worked overtime, following every lead, checking every connection, determined to bring as many victims home as possible. The evidence collected painted a picture of a sophisticated operation that had preyed on vulnerable young people. The traffickers had used social media to identify potential victims, learning their routines and habits before making their move. But now their methods were exposed, their tactics documented, their network being dismantled one arrest at a time. Local police departments began implementing new training programs based on lessons learned from the case. Officers were taught to look for the subtle signs of trafficking, to recognize the hand signals that could indicate someone needed help, to understand how traffickers use technology to hide their activities. The case was becoming a template for how to identify and stop trafficking operations. The impact rippled outward, touching communities all along the East Coast. Parents learned about the warning signs to watch for, schools implemented new safety protocols, and transportation workers were trained to spot suspicious behavior. What had started with one girl's silent call for help was growing into a movement to protect others from falling victim to trafficking. 3 months after that fateful night at the rest stop, sunshine streamed through the windows of a community center where a special ceremony was taking place. The Marine sat quietly in the back row, watching as the young girl he had helped rescue stepped up to the podium. She looked different now, confident, strong, her head held high as she faced the audience of law enforcement officers, community leaders, and families. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice clear and steady. She shared her story not as a victim, but as a survivor who had found her strength. She described learning the hand signal from a social media safety video, how she had waited for the right moment to use it, and how a stranger's attention had changed everything. Her words carried the weight of experience but also the lightness of hope. In the audience, investigators who had worked the case listened intently. The evidence they had gathered had led to over 20 arrests, the rescue of 11 other trafficking victims, and the shutdown of 3 major trafficking routes along the East Coast. But numbers and statistics couldn't capture the real impact. The lives changed, the families reunited, the hope restored. The young girl spoke about her recovery journey, about the counselors and support groups that had helped her heal. She talked about returning to school, about her dreams for the future, and about her decision to become an advocate for other survivors. Her story wasn't just about escape anymore, it was about transformation. After the ceremony, the community center buzzed with activity as people gathered in small groups, sharing stories and ideas. Parents learned about new safety apps and warning signs to watch for. Teachers discussed programs to help students protect themselves. Transport workers exchanged tips on spotting suspicious behavior. The ripple effect of one brave signal for help had become a wave of positive change. The Marine watched as the young girl moved through the crowd, talking with other survivors and their families. Each conversation seemed to make her stronger, more determined. She had taken the darkness of her experience and turned it into a light for others to follow. When she spotted him in the crowd, she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Local news crews captured the event, spreading awareness to even more communities. The story became a powerful reminder that trafficking could happen anywhere, but so could rescue and recovery. The hand signal that had saved one life was now being taught in schools, community centers, and safety workshops across the country. Behind the scenes, the impact continued to grow. The evidence gathered from that single traffic stop had helped law enforcement develop better methods for identifying trafficking operations. New training programs were being implemented, teaching officers and civilians alike how to recognize the subtle signs that something might be wrong. Support services for survivors had expanded, offering more resources for healing and recovery. Safe houses opened their doors to more victims, counselors developed specialized programs, and advocacy groups created new ways to help survivors rebuild their lives. The case had shown what was possible when communities came together to protect their most vulnerable members. The young girl's courage had inspired others to come forward, each survivor's story adding to the growing movement for change. Some spoke at schools, sharing their experiences to help others stay safe. Others worked with law enforcement, providing insights that helped officers better understand and combat trafficking. Each person who shared their story helped break down the walls of silence that had protected traffickers for so long. Social media platforms had taken notice, developing new features to help users signal for help discreetly. Transportation companies implemented enhanced training for their staff. Hotel workers learned to spot warning signs. The ripple effect touched every part of the community, creating layers of protection and awareness. As the event drew to a close, the Marin watched the young girl embrace her family, a sight that made every moment of that long night worth it. She had gone from sending a silent signal for help to becoming a powerful voice for change. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate showed others that there was always hope, always a way forward. The ceremony ended with the announcement of new community initiatives, safety workshops, support groups, and education programs. The young girl would be involved in many of them, sharing her story to help others recognize the signs of trafficking and know how to respond. Her experience had shown that sometimes the smallest actions, a hand signal, a moment of attention, a phone call, could set in motion events that changed many lives. Outside the community center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The Marine thought back to that dark night at the rest stop, how different things might have been if he hadn't noticed that silent call for help. But he had noticed, and that moment of awareness had grown into something much larger than himself. People lingered after the ceremony, reluctant to let go of the sense of purpose and possibility that filled the air. The young girl's story had shown them that positive change was possible, that communities could come together to protect their own, that hope could emerge from even the darkest situations. As the Marine headed home, he knew that somewhere, perhaps at another rest stop on another dark night, someone else would see a signal for help and know exactly what to do.